You hear it? Yeah.
Oh, we just have. Oh, Nikki, could you? Oh, it's okay. I've got that. Right. I think everyone's on mute now. Mel and Matthew, feel free to take it away.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Charlotte, and it's wonderful to be with you all today. It's actually really good to be back with Victor. I first encountered Victor, 2008, 2010, somewhere. I mean, it was before Tracy, if anybody remembers Tracy. This is how far back it goes, and I've sort of been involved on and off with Victor. Largely not terribly involved with Victor over the past few years, but I remember meeting Charlotte at a family weekend, one of the early family weekends when Scarlett was very young. And so it's really nice to reconnect with everybody and to be part of this event tonight. My name is Matthew Horspool. I am part of the Braillists Foundation. I say part of the Braillists Foundation because I seem to wear quite a lot of hats in the Braillists at the moment. But I look after the day-to-day operations of the organisation, which includes all the finance admin and all of that sort of thing. So nominally they call me the treasurer, but that's just a title, really. I think there's also quite a bit about me in the blurb that you would have had prior to this session, so I'm not going to rehearse that. I'm joined by Mel Pritchard, who is our excellent Braille for Beginners teacher, and I'll get her to introduce herself in just a second. Hopefully we won't go on for too long, and hopefully the presentation will be interesting. I'm aware we haven't got many props and we haven't got many slides, so we'll try not to take up too much time, and we really would quite like it to be as interactive as possible. But before we get to the interactive part, we need to sort of set some foundations in place. So to that end, we're going to talk about who is Braille for. We're going to talk about some typical uses of Braille. I mean, it's for textbooks, but what else is it for? We're going to talk about some of the specifics in terms of actually, okay, you've identified that your child needs to learn Braille, but what does that look like? How long is it going to take? What are the reading schemes going to look like? All of that sort of thing. If you're a parent, which I think most of you are, and you're wanting to support your children learning Braille, how can you learn the Braille code and how can you support your children's Braille learning journey? And then very briefly at the end, we're going to talk about Braille technology. We're not going to talk substantially about Braille technology in this session, but I'm sure Victor will be very happy to hear from you. If Braille technology is something you'd like to talk about, let Victor know. And we'd be very happy to come back and do a session later on in the year, perhaps, or maybe next year, if that's something that you'd be interested in. So that's the session. And hopefully it will be useful to you, and there'll be plenty of time afterwards for questions. So what I'll do, I'll turn it over to Mel. I'll ask Mel to just say a little bit about her, and then perhaps start us off by talking about who Braille is for and what people might use it for. So over to Mel.
Okay, thank you, Matthew, and hi to everyone. Lovely to be here. And yes, Matthew's a big part of the Braillists Foundation. I don't do anywhere near as much. I'm quite happy to be a little bit lower down the scale. I don't do finance or anything like that. What I do is Braille for Beginners. And actually, Matthew mentioned just now about how parents can learn Braille to help their children. On my Braille for Beginners course, I have had parents, and not only have they benefited from the Braille for Beginners course, so actually from learning Braille, but they've had a great deal of support, peer support, if you like, from the other learners. So, you know, the parents have always told me that it's been a great experience being in contact with other visually impaired people. Parents do, you know, tend to find that really, really useful because it gives them an idea of what older visually impaired people do, how they use their Braille. And I'm quite old because, you know, if expertise, you mentioned expertise at the beginning, well, I've been doing Braille since I was about 6 and I'm now over 60. So if time counts, then I'm an expert. Otherwise, maybe I'm not. But yeah, we'll make a start. And, you know, who should be taught is a really important question in my mind. And thinking of for children, it's not, there's a bit of a myth that, oh, blind people should learn Braille, people who can't see at all. And yes, of course, they should. And this is children and adults, of course. But for children, it's not just people who have no vision that should learn Braille, because many children with a visual impairment, they may have some really useful vision, and with magnification, especially when they're younger and they have a book with maybe 2 or 3 words on a page, they can manage to get by because the words are quite big and they might not need to magnify it. But then as they go through the system and as they get a bit older and a little bit more proficient with their reading, and the print gets smaller and you get more words on a page, I'm sure you see where I'm coming from with this, it gets a little bit more difficult. So trying to use in schools, trying to use paper which is twice the size that it should be, you know, a big A3 sheet, because they need magnified print and they may have to have it really close up to their eyes to read it, and so they're hidden behind this huge piece of paper. They might be able to see, but there's no reason why they shouldn't be learning Braille. It would be very beneficial. So that's my feeling on, it's not just totally blind children, but any children. They may get tired by the end of the school day, and the first sessions in the day, their eyes are bright and they're able to cope, but by the last session, oh, their head, they just want to cover their eyes because they're so exhausted from struggling with their vision. You know, there are lots of good reasons to want to learn Braille. Would you like to add to that, Matthew?
I yeah, just I mean that's a really really good overview. I actually saw a parent once in a previous life. I was the Braille transcriber at Exhall Grange School in Warwickshire, and would occasionally see parents who would say, "Look, you know, I really don't want my child to learn Braille because it would just be like switching his eyes off." I had one parent come and say exactly that, and I said at the time, I said, "Look, the thing is, in all reality, that is exactly what we're doing. We are switching his eyes off, but switching his eyes off is not necessarily a bad thing, because the eyes are not going to have the stamina that a sighted person's eyes would have." And so you imagine, for example, that your child has been reading print to such an extent that when it gets to the end of the day and that your child needs to cross the road in order to get home, if the eyes are so tired that they can't see the traffic on the road, you know, this is a serious safety concern. And I mean, yes, okay, they should also, by the way, be using a long cane and using their blindness skills in order to travel effectively. But, you know, just looking at Braille in that context, if they'd used Braille in the classroom all day, they'd have had no need to use their eyes, no need to strain their eyes. And so by the end of the day, actually, their eyes would still be useful in terms of that very, very important thing of getting home. So sometimes turning your eyes off, even if it feels like you shouldn't do it, sometimes it's the thing to do, and actually learning what's an important thing to use your eyes for and what's not an important thing to use your eyes for. The other thing, just going back to A3 paper, yeah, if you're a mathematician and you're wanting some really cold hard facts about when it will be appropriate to start teaching Braille, this is not a cold hard fact. This is a guideline, but it's as close as you're going to get. The average size of a Braille letter, or the size of a Braille letter, is about the average size of a print letter at size 24 point. So if we're talking to someone who's using anything above size 24, even if they're using size 36, at that point, a large print book is probably going to be more bulky than a Braille book. And okay, fine, you could use the large print on an iPad or something, but equally you could use the Braille on a Braille display. The bulk factor goes away when you get above roughly 24 point. This is not an exact science, but it might give you, if you're looking for some ammunition to persuade the local authority to introduce Braille to a child, that might be some useful ammunition to go on.
It's probably also worth mentioning before we move away from this topic as well, Matthew, that we hate to think that anyone's sight is going to worsen, but if Braille is learned at a very early age and their sight does become worse in later life, that skill is already there. The amount of adults, I've got people in their 80s in my Braille for Beginners, and it's much more difficult to learn Braille in your 80s than it is when you're a child. So, you know, they may never need it in later life, and we all hope they don't. But the skill is there just in case.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
So the skill is there, and we're talking about it very academically at the moment in terms of, a child needs to read Braille and write Braille in order to succeed in school. And I mean, this is important. Of course, Braille is very useful. There are, of course, textbooks in all subjects, particularly actually if we start talking about the STEM subjects, if we talk about mathematics and science, those textbooks can be particularly useful in Braille because this is very detailed stuff, and you do need to make sure you're using the right signs at the right time. And I don't want to spend too much time talking about Braille versus screen readers and Braille versus synthetic speech. They both have their place. But, an English textbook, you could probably get away with listening to that textbook if you needed to for some reason. A maths textbook would be a lot harder. So there are, even within school, there are some things where Braille is perhaps not more useful, but certainly the need for Braille is clearer than others. If we talk more broadly, though, even things like lift buttons and signage can be useful in Braille. In day-to-day life as an adult, you might decide that you're not going to read a huge amount of Braille, and that's a choice that every individual blind person has got to make. But even blind people who make the choice not to read an awful lot of Braille might still, when they have to stay in a hotel for the first time, or even stay in a hotel full stop, and they've got to go and look at, okay, what room am I in? I'm in room 240 or something. Okay, so they get in the lift, they find floor number 2, and they can read the number because it's in Braille. And if the hotel's got Braille signage, they can see what door number they're at, and they're not accidentally trying to unlock somebody else's door. Or, if they need to know the toilets, right, the men's toilets and the ladies' toilets, a lot of toilets actually have signs on in Braille to show which is which, so you don't end up going into the wrong room. So even very basic things like this, Braille can be very useful, and I'm sure Mel has lots more examples along those lines.
Well, I think those are certainly the main ones, and really the signage. And I know we're not on to how people learn yet, and we will get to how people learn, but it's quite important, I think, especially when you're building up those skills of using your fingers and learning. If you've got something in the school, for instance, that you're touching every day, like your name on a locker or on the peg that your coat's hanging on, and you're just touching and you feel that name, the more a bit like how a sighted child learns to read. They're looking around all the time. Everywhere they look, there's a sign. Oh, there's a, if they're touching, if the Braille learners are touching that, you're getting that information in time after time after time. Um, the, the more they use it, the quicker those letters will go in. But yes, you can be quite clever about signage. It's a long time since I was at school, but when I went to school, they'd got Braille labels on absolutely everything, even the radiator, I think. How on earth it stayed on and didn't melt, I don't know. But we were encouraged to just touch the Braille all the time, to get that learning started. So yes, you can be very good with your labeling and very clever with it, and make it useful. And also the other children enjoy it too, because it's something different. So I think it's really important.
Well, and even simple things like greetings cards. I remember as
Mm.
a small child, it would be my birthday or it would be Christmas. And I'm sorry to say, it was painstaking. I would have to sit there and pretend to be grateful while I opened all of these cards that I couldn't read. And so my mum would have to read them to me. And it just wouldn't mean anything. It's still to this day, actually. I'm terrible at writing cards because it just fills me with dread. It brings back memories I don't particularly want to be brought back about literally, you'd spend an hour just listening to your mum constantly say happy birthday, and you'd know that it was happy birthday from somebody else. But do you know something? Actually, the whole thing was just completely pointless and meaningless and was just a drag. Do you know, as an adult, I receive a Christmas card and I still get that sense of dread. And it's actually really quite special when somebody's gone to the trouble of brailing a card. actually, it really touches me in quite a fundamental way. And I never thought I would say that. But actually, there is something really, really special about opening a card that's got Braille in it. And I feel like I can experience some of what everybody else experiences. And I'm starting to get the sense that these greetings cards are actually quite important. But yeah, I mean, having Braille, it's just such a valuable and powerful thing to do. So even simple things like that can really make a huge difference.
They can, and I'd absolutely agree with that. And I think we've got a couple of questions already in the chat. Should we address those maybe before?
Yeah, I was just thinking that we do have a question about, do children have the right to learn Braille as a way to access the curriculum? My daughter, who reads at size 60 fonts, has been told her local authority Braille lessons are stopping because she can access print.
This is really hard.
Mm-hmm.
My knowledge of the law in this area is very ropey, so I wouldn't want to give you any legal advice. RNIB have a children and young people and families team. They can be reached at CYPF. It's children, young people and families. CYPF at rnib.org.uk. They have specialist QTVIs, one of whom is Jane Sharp. And Jane is likely to be very up about this sort of thing, and it would certainly be worth having a conversation. My understanding of the situation is that legally, actually, there isn't much of a leg to stand on in either direction. I don't think Braille is a legal right as such. Obviously, the right to education is a fundamental human right. And so if you could argue that by denying access to Braille, you're denying their fundamental right to education, you might have something, but that could potentially be quite a difficult battle to fight. And you might need some specialist legal support, and the legal bills could end up being quite expensive. So I don't know that anyone's actually tried it. The best vehicle, certainly when I was in the sector, and that was about 10 years ago, so things may have changed, but the best vehicle at that time was the Education Health and Care Plan, EHCP, which was previously the Statement of Special Educational Needs. If you can get Braille listed on the statement, on the EHCP, then the school is legally obliged, because the school is legally obliged to follow the statement. And so that would be the route, just going off the top of my head, that would be the route that I would go down, would be at the next annual review meeting to really push this point home and to hammer it home that there must be Braille on the EHCP. And it might be worth contacting specialist education services. I don't know whether VICTA has one. I think Blind Children UK might have an education service, but certainly, if you get an education advocate, they used to be called, they would actually be able to come into the annual review meeting with you and try and fight that battle for you, and write letters and do all of the sort of tribunal stuff that might need to happen. So yeah, I'm not sure how helpful that answer was. Please don't take it as absolute solid advice, and I would get clarification of it from people who are still in the industry, but that's my understanding of it at the moment.
I think the thing to make clear is that there is support out there with this type of question, because you've got RNIB who will support you. Guide dogs, although the name suggests giving out guide dogs, they are so much more than that these days, and because they have a strong children's services department, and they offer a lot of advice and support. So there are a couple of places you can go. It's good to have someone behind you in this kind of time, isn't it, where you just need that little bit of support. So there's some places to go. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks very much, both of you. That was really useful. I'll follow up some of those organisations for some advice.
Yeah, no worries. Sometimes, I mean, the hardest thing, the soul-destroying thing about it is that sometimes you have to make it a case. Sometimes you have to prove them wrong rather than prove yourself right.
Yeah.
And that can be absolutely soul-destroying. So, preparing for that could be quite useful. If you're able to say, if they're saying, look, that there's no point learning Braille because your daughter can access print, the response to that then needs to be, actually, she can't access print, and here's why. And that can be
it doesn't exist.
Yeah, and that can be a really hard thing to put together, and it can be absolutely soul-destroying. I mean, for you as a parent, that must be the hardest thing, because you're constantly looking at what your daughter can't do rather than what your daughter can do, and that can be really hard. So actually, even if you can put the case together, making sure that you've got the emotional support behind you to support you while you're going through that, could be really, really useful.
Yes, and one of my parents that I mentioned earlier on in the session that came to me at Braille for Beginners, she was having a similar issue where the school really were not keen to teach Braille. So that was why she wanted to learn so that she could then encourage her child to learn so they could learn together. And so that when they were reading at home in the evenings, even if they weren't happy to do it at school, she was able to get books from Braille Braille libraries with print and Braille, and they were able to share the books and really bring Braille into the child's life from quite an early age, even though the school weren't happy. And I'm hoping, because that was the sort of thing we suggested, hopefully when the child went back into school and said, hey, I could read this Braille really well, maybe that was a lesson to the school. We have to hope so.
In our case, we've got Braille at home, and we're obviously keen at home, and school are brilliant, but it's just the local authority QTVI has abruptly decided that she's finished now after a short time.
Are you allowed to tell me which local authority it is?
I'm happy to tell you it's Cheshire East.
Oh, that's fascinating. That is really interesting, because Cheshire East have actually engaged with the Braillists quite positively, so I'm quite surprised to hear that.
Okay.
There are local authorities that I definitely wouldn't be surprised about, and I'm a little bit surprised about Cheshire East.
Okay.
Have you escalated it within the authority? So the local authority, the particular QTVI that you've got has said that. Have you tried escalating it to the head of service, or possibly asking someone else in the local authority to look at it?
No, I'm just at the point of getting some advice from the impartial advice service that's part of the council. And then when I've done that, I'm going to escalate it within the sensory inclusion service.
Yeah, I would like to think that what you might have is either a trainee or recently qualified QTVI, or somebody who's looking at the budget, or possibly, I don't know.
I think it's the budget, yeah.
Yeah. So, and actually sometimes it's the catchment as well. In Warwickshire, we had this problem. If somebody lived near the office, we were quite happy to teach them Braille. If somebody lived a bit further out, the QTVIs have to meet targets in terms of how many people they see in a week. And if they're going out, if they've got an hour's journey to go and see this one child to do a half an hour Braille lesson, that's preventing them from meeting their targets. And so I hate to say it, but I definitely saw it happen in Warwickshire, where we would end up deprioritizing the people who were further out because they were just harder to support. And it's a horrible thing to say, and I absolutely hated it, but I can tell you it does happen. So I would definitely escalate it. I would like to think that somebody in Cheshire East who's a bit higher up might take this one a bit more
I definitely
seriously.
will. I just wanted to get some advice first. So what you've said has been really helpful of places I can get advice from. So thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
And Rachel as well, I'll do a follow-up email after this session tomorrow, and I'll give you some contact details for kind of educational specialists that have been mentioned.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you. Thanks so much.
Just to give you a little bit of guidance. We do have another question here saying, where can I access Braille sharp books, etc. for grade 1 for practice? A friend has found a Braille birthday card in the supermarket the other day, and it's for my daughter's birthday. So have you got any tips? Someone has suggested in the chat living paintings. Don't know if Matthew and Mel, have you got anywhere else that you think would be good for the parents to try?
Okay, well, it's a little bit different, but I read with my grandchildren. I can't see, my grandchildren can, and I have joined the Clear Vision Library, and Clear Vision provide books with Braille and print, so I'm able to read the Braille, my grandchildren can see the pictures, so we're able to share books. Now that's not so much for learning Braille, because although they are short stories because they're children's books, but I already know the Braille. But that is a nice way to introduce Braille without, we're still having the visual side of it as well with the pictures. Living paintings is another one. I think you have another one, Matthew, that you mentioned before, and I can't think which one it was.
I'm not sure. So you've said Clear Vision already. Sorry, I was distracted by the chat.
Yeah. Clear Vision, but there's another one, isn't there?
Clear Vision. No, I think Living Paintings was what I mentioned.
There's also Guide Dogs have one, and I can't remember. Again, I think they actually create the books to order almost.
Customize,
That's it.
I'm not sure if they do Braille.
Yes, they do, I think.
Okay.
And it's also there's a fantastic group I'm a member of, and it came from someone who was a member of the parent support group on Facebook, and she basically had all these Braille books, and then they were using them, and now what parents do is trade the Braille books round, so someone can use it for a little while, and somebody posts it out using the free
Yeah, the articles for the blind.
articles for the blind
Yeah,
service.
that's
And
right.
yeah, and I do have a parent who's got a lovely group. So when I do the follow-up email, I'll also include that link, because everyone's using it for a little while and then sending it across. So it's kind of not having to keep getting these books in. It's a parent that's helping parents type scenario. So it's and I think she's doing really well. Last time I looked in. Oh God, the questions are coming thick and
They
fast.
are, yes.
Yeah, I also Anthea, I like that suggestion about for Rachel about going to the local councillor and MPA. That is always, because I've got to the stage of being sick of fighting for everything for my daughter. I just go straight to my MP now. I think he's quite sick of me, but every time I ask him, things get done quickly. So that's also another suggestion.
Yeah, thank you. That's a good shout.
Yeah, and then this question, this has come direct to me, so I don't know if anyone else can read it. Parent said, I love the idea of making labels around the house and asking the schools to do the same. Can anyone advise on the best tool or device to create these easily and quickly?
Okay, well, you can get labeling devices. The probably other people do them, and I don't want to sort of advertise RNIB, we keep mentioning them, but they do a Braille labeler, which is takes Dymo tape. And the good thing about that particular method is it has a big dial on it with Braille around the dial, and you turn the dial to the letter, press it, and then turn to the next letter and press it, and you create a label with this Braille labeling gadget. But there is also print around the dial, so someone who doesn't know Braille very well can use the print rather than Braille, but the actual label comes out in Braille. So that's a nice, quick and easy way to make little labels. Matthew, have you anything to add to that?
No, I would absolutely second that. I think
Okay, well, good.
sometimes sometimes the way that I would recommend to a parent to make Braille might be different to the way that I would recommend a blind person to make Braille. So the Dymo gun for a parent, what we affectionately call the Dymo gun, the Braille labeler, is fabulous for all the reasons that Mel has said. It would definitely be the go-to. Visually, it would be very quick to spin the dial to the right letter and squeeze the gun, and you get the letter, and then move the dial around. I actually don't like the Dymo gun very much. As a blind person, I find it actually quite labor intensive to have to move the dial around and make sure it's lined up properly. So I would probably do them. Actually, I'm a bit old fashioned. I would do them in an actual Braille frame and punch each dot through one by one and do them that way. But I mean, that's one blind person talking to another blind person. From a parent's point of view, the Dymo gun, definitely.
It's ideal just for little labels. It's a good, quick and easy way. The label gets snipped off, peel the back off, stick it on somewhere, really nice and easy and quick. And I still use it. I've got Braille on all my spices in my kitchen and things like that. And I use the Braille labeler. You might get, if you had loads of labeling, you might get repetitive strain injury, because this gun part, you have to squeeze it, and after a while your wrist gets really but yeah, so that's a good way of labeling. I'm aware there's a few questions. A quick one to answer. The Braille for Beginners course, yes, it is online, and I'm sure Matthew will be giving us the details of the website, so you'll be able to go on there and have a look. Yes, you do get sent some resources, but the sessions, you don't have to sort of turn up. I think once a month we have a session where you can turn up and get some actual advice from a real person, but most of it, yeah, you just have the information that you can go at your own rate and learn at home, so you don't have to turn up anywhere to do Braille for Beginners. So that answers that one quickly.
Yeah, and that was.
I think
sorry, carry on.
Sorry, yeah, and I think the other question was about your course, Mel. So I think we've.
Yeah, that was the one, the Braille for Beginners. Yeah, that's the one that we run.
And yeah, I've shared the link for the labeler into the
lovely
for everyone, but I'll also include that in the follow-up email tomorrow. Yeah, I think we're up to date on questions. If you guys,
well, we're nearly up to date. There was a couple that I wanted to pick up on. I wanted to come back to Tom because he had a question about Braille courses, which I don't think I fully understood. So if you're able to unmute. and just talk me through that. Before we do that, just to come back to Nikki's point about how clear vision is a bit limited for 11 plus. This is an interesting problem, and I'd be really interested to hear what brought that question on. And I think actually Alex Britton at Clear Vision, Alex is fabulous. She really is. I mean, every time we go to Sight Village, she's always there. You know, we always catch up. She's always really interested in what we're up to. Really, really, I mean, she's sighted, but really engaged in the blind world, and it would be well worth talking to Alex. The reason why Clear Vision drops off when they get to 11 plus is because historically, children will have finished learning Braille by the time they get to 11 plus. So they'll be at secondary school by then. They'll be able to read grade 2. They'll be able to read single line space. They'll be able to read double-sided. And so at that point, the assumption is that they would transition to the RNIB library, and they would just get books out of the RNIB library, and they wouldn't need Clear Vision anymore. Now, that assumption may not be valid anymore because Braille teaching is evolving. And if you've got a need for books, you know, post 11 plus from Clear Vision, I would definitely make that need known to Clear Vision and you know, address the message to Alex Britton directly, and she'll definitely pick that up. And you know, she's always on the lookout for feedback and new projects and, you know, new ways to take funding. So she would definitely receive that feedback positively if you needed to put it forward.
That was going to be my response too, because I know things were different when we were at school, certainly when I was at school, but by the time I was that age, I would have been in the RNIB library and getting my books from then. So yes. Caught up on questions?
Nearly. Yeah, we need to get the RNIB library. In terms of being behind on reading age, because that was the response to that question. The RNIB library, in fact, has primary, you know, 5 plus, 7 plus age reading books as well. So, you know, even if he's behind the reading age, the RNIB library will still have books that would be appropriate, I think.
Mm-hmm. They do have a good selection of children's books, much better than it used to be. We even read them in our Braillists because we have a book club, and although they're adults reading, they find it quite fun to read children's books, and we have a lot of fun reading the children's books. So we know they have quite a good selection.
Brilliant.
Was it Tom who asked the question about?
It was Jacob.
Jacob, I'm so sorry. Yes.
Let me see. So, Jacob, you can either unmute or I can ask this question for you. It's
Well, I can read the question.
Yeah.
Hi, yeah. I can read the question. I'm just not sure I understand it fully.
So I can read it out. It's so Jacob's our 3-year-old son. He was born blind. We're just asking if there's any interactive courses or in-person courses to attend. We're really struggling to learn Braille through the online courses.
Yeah, so but what I meant, so this is a good conversation. So are you trying to learn Braille for yourself, or are you trying to teach Jacob Braille?
For myself. Yeah, I want to learn Braille for myself, yeah.
So have you tried the uebonline.org website?
Yes, I've made a start, but I found it quite difficult to do it online that way. But
yeah.
I was wondering if there's anything else out there.
Okay, there is. It depends. It's a bit of a lottery again on where you live, because, for instance, if you lived in Coventry, there are a couple of different ones you can attend, run by the council, but they don't happen in every city. So I would say get in touch with your local authority, see if there are any Braille courses for adults that you could go on.
Okay, yeah, I live in North London.
Well, I'm sure there must be something.
North London. Send an email into help@braillists.org. And I've got a list somewhere that we need to publish, and I haven't got around to it yet of courses. And I'll see if I can see if I can find something. But if you want to be a bit more, I mean, perhaps not now. This might be a conversation to take offline. But if you want to be a bit more specific about where UEB Online is causing problems, because there might be some self-study resources that are not UEB Online that, you know, are perhaps in hard copy that might be useful to you, but they would follow the same sort of style as UEB Online. So if it's the style of UEB Online that's the problem, then they're probably not going to be much help. But
it's fair to say too that many of us as adults, we learn much better with other people. Online doesn't suit everyone. So, it's much more interesting to be in a group and learn and get the peer support as well as the support of the tutor. So you're absolutely normal, feeling like that. You're not alone.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I was after. Any in-person classes that we could sort of work together on. Yeah, rather than just sat on your own. Yeah.
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 I agree.
Would also, if it's, I mean, again, depends what the local authority is. I mean, where are we talking? Harrow, Brent,
Barnet.
Barnet. Okay, I don't know.
Mhm.
Don't know that local authority. That's annoying. I was going to say that there's a couple of very good QCVIs out in Brent that might be useful. But anyway, it might even be worth talking to the local authority about it, because they might not be able to offer anything. But if they know that there's demand, they might start. And also, not to put VICTA on the spot, but perhaps send that feedback into VICTA, because there might be scope for VICTA to apply for some funding to run something. It might not be a Braille course, but maybe something at the family weekends or something like a Braille check-in for parents or something. I don't know. It's not really my place to comment, but it would definitely be worth putting the feedback in, because the more people who talk about it in the more places, the more likely we are to get something.
Okay.
I don't mean to jump in, but I'm Laura Brodkin. I'm also from Barnet, and I don't know of one, and would love to find out. So I'm happy to join that and see how we can accommodate. We work with Katie Taylor, who you guys may know, who's our fantastic support. She was the one who told me to come onto this call. But yeah, I would love to find out a bit more in terms of parental support and learning ourselves as parents for our kids in the North London area.
Oh, that's great to know, Laura. We're with Karen, who's also, Barnet are amazing, completely amazing. So yeah, we could join forces on that.
Fab.
I can feel a trip to London coming on. We can't see all these people.
This is brilliant.
You're all welcome. You're all welcome.
All head to Barnet.
Well, and this is good, right? Because if we've got what we're talking about now, 3 sets of parents that want to learn Braille. That is enough to start a group off that. So if actually, I mean, I would hope that actually Barnet might run a group. That's enough that if I was working in a local authority, I would quite seriously consider running something at that point. Yeah, that's a good number.
Yeah, it's great when you get together, because lots more gets done if there's 3 or 4 of you. I mean, the first Braille course I ever did with adult education, I think we only had 5 people, and they put a course on. So hey, you never know. Even if the actual local authority for visually impaired don't want to do something, tackle the education service, the adult ed service.
Great, thank you.
No
Good luck.
There was a question from Sam asking if the RNIB library books are available in hard copy, or if we're talking about Bookshare. It's a really important question, and thank you for raising it. There is, just to sort of clarify what RNIB Bookshare is, and I know most people probably know this already, but just to set the stage, RNIB Bookshare is a website that is open to educational institutions. So it's only open to educational institutions and the people that are within those. So, the teachers can have access, the support staff, the children, and by extension, the parents. But it's only open while they're in school, and it's not for hard copy books at all. It's just electronic books. And you can get electronic Braille books, but that is all it is. Separate to that, the RNIB for consumers, for just individual blind people, run the RNIB library. And that takes 2 forms. The online version of it, which is sort of like RNIB Bookshare, but not, is called Reading Services. So if you hear talk of RNIB Reading Services, that's the consumer version of RNIB Bookshare, if you like, at a very high level. It's actually nothing like the consumer version of RNIB Bookshare, but at a high level, that's kind of how to think about it. And then there is the RNIB library itself, which offers hard copy books, and that's recently gone through quite a transformation to the point where they're now printing those books on demand. So if you order a book from the RNIB library, it will come in a format that is nice and small and portable, and you can keep it for as long as you like. And when you don't want it anymore, you just either pass it on to somebody else or recycle it. You don't need to return it. So it's a very good way of getting access to high quality nicely pristine new hard copy Braille books. And as long as you are a blind person or acting on behalf of a blind person, you can join the RNIB library. So for children, the parents can join the RNIB library on behalf of the child. And then obviously when the child becomes 18 or what have you, the child can take over that library membership. And it just carries on.
Let's just clarify a couple of things. The size, yes, they are much smaller, because we remember books being really huge and large and ugly looking volumes that weren't very attractive. They do come in little A4 size pamphlets. You may have quite a lot of pamphlets to make a whole book, but the fact is they are quite small. So if you're reading a section of a book, you only need probably one of these little pamphlets at a time. So they are much nicer. And I think the fact that they are new, you get them new, is really important, because several people haven't been reading those books before you get them. And the fact that it's free too, isn't it, Matthew? It is a totally free service, so well worth using.
Absolutely.
Sorry to interrupt you.
No, you're welcome to do that. They are the response to that was, are they large print too, or just Braille? And I think the RNIB has closed the large print library completely some years ago.
They have. There are other options out there, though. I think there are, and I don't really. Well, apart from guide dogs, which I know they have a certain amount of books, but I think there are other options. And of course, the libraries now, library services generally do many more large print books, don't they, than they used to? So that's a local library thing as well.
It's an interesting point, though. I think, and it speaks in Braille's favour. Braille is pretty binary. It's a 6-dot cell, and you either know it or you don't. And okay, there's grade 1 Braille and there's grade 2 Braille, and there are subtleties like that. But by and large, Braille is Braille, and you've either got it or you haven't. Large print, there's so much variation. Do you want large print at size 14, size 18, 24, 36, 48? Do you want it bold? What contrast do you want? And so actually maintaining a large print library is a lot harder, and getting access to large print in the type and style that you need is potentially quite a lot harder. So customized books have done a lot of work in this area and really are fabulous. But it's a big selling point for Braille, actually, in that, okay, fine, you've got to learn Braille, but once you've learnt Braille, you just need to tell somebody that you need Braille, and that's all you need to tell them. You don't need to say, right, I need 48. Oh, yeah, but I forgot to tell them that it needs to be printed on, yellow paper for me able to read it. So it is a lot more straightforward from the admin point of view to learn Braille.
I'm aware of time. We've gone on quite a long time. I know we've had quite a few questions, but I don't want to sort of take over your session if there are other things, because we're almost up to we'll soon be an hour, won't we?
Yeah.
And we've still got other questions too. So
yeah, we did have one. Sorry, just about one of the parents had submitted this in via the form. After pre-Braille skills, when formal Braille learning starts, is it recommended to use the standard small dots, or bigger dots, or even 6-hole cake tin with tennis balls in?
all right.
Or much information about pre-Braille skills?
I'm happy for you to take this, Matthew, but I will if you'd like me to.
Oh, I'd love you to take it. I'm still digesting the question.
Okay. Well, I personally, unless if the child has what I would class as normal tactile skills, so if they are able to feel quite easily, then I would always suggest, if possible, stick to normal size Braille if you can. Because if someone gets used to feeling something larger, you can actually get jumbo Braille. And there was a great thing about, oh, wonderful jumbo Braille, how good this is, I can feel it better. But then it's not much good if you can't get books in it. So sooner or later, you end up having to go down to the normal Braille size. Having said that, when someone is learning Braille and they need to get those shapes into their mind, child or adult, the same. It doesn't matter really what you use, as long as you can get those shapes. But yeah, pretty quickly, if they're going to be using Braille seriously, then it's good to get down to normal size, because a normal size letter will fit on someone's finger pad. Maybe if a child has got very little fingers, they might have to move a little bit. But the idea is that a letter goes onto that finger pad, and they can move along a line feeling the letters without having to, if you had I don't know, something huge and they were having to actually move their hands around to feel the whole letter, that could be really quite confusing in the long run. So yeah, it's good for learning the shapes to have larger. I used to use an egg box with my adults, an egg box with ping pong balls, very technical stuff, wasn't it? And we just used to move the ping pong balls around and make the letter shapes. And that's great for when you're learning. But yeah, get down to that normal size as soon as they're able, because that's where the Braille will come eventually.
I'd agree with that. I'd also add that the other problem with the bigger Braille is that the bigger it is, the more like a single object it feels. So if you've got a big Braille letter T or something that's made out of, a cake tin or an egg box or something, that's one thing. The letter T is a standalone big letter T. Now, that letter T as a standalone object is not terribly useful. It becomes useful in words like that and tell and stand, and you get the idea. But if we're het up on teaching people about Braille letters, we forget to teach them that actually these letters form words. And once you've got the Braille letters down to small, you can then start to make big words without them taking up the whole table.
And this is, if you're learning to read print, I didn't learn as a small child, so I'm the wrong person to say this, really. I'm kind of guessing. But as well as learning letters, you quite quickly learn to recognize a whole word when you can look at even small words to begin with, and or of or with. And in Braille, when letter combinations appear together quite often, you feel them more quickly, just in the same way as someone recognizes them visually more quickly. So all that happens much quicker if the Braille is normal size.
Just reverting actually to Anthea's question, because it fits in very nicely and I think is the only one we haven't yet not answered, which was about tips for older children learning Braille due to unexpected vision loss and maintaining, improving, ongoing, etc., etc. I actually think the advice there that you've just given, Mel, it probably applies just as equally to older children, really, doesn't it?
It does. And for older children too, I know we're not really going into technology, but I couldn't leave the session without mentioning it. And I think for older children, this is where technology really comes in, because as children get older, Braille becomes a bit of I don't want to stand out, I don't want to be different in the classroom, I don't want to appear different. But if they're using something along the lines of technology, it's cool, it's modern, everybody loves it, they're going to feel a little bit more special. So yeah, that would be another way, is to try and bring in some technology. By technology, I mean ways of reading Braille that aren't on actual hard copy sheets. So you can actually get Braille displays where you have a line of Braille along. It's hard to see on a Zoom call, but you can actually physically feel it and move it and change it, and it's a nice, neat little box. And as I say, children love technology. Most of them do, anyway.
So we'll run the second half of the presentation. Thank you, everybody, for the questions. This has been brilliant, and keep them coming. But we will just quickly run the second half of the presentation. Going slightly off topic, sorry, Mel, but it might just be worth, since the topic of pre-Braille has come up in a couple of different contexts. Yeah, well, I wonder if it might actually be worth taking a step back and talking about what pre-Braille is, and what might be expected at pre-Braille, because I think pre-Braille for children is probably slightly different to pre-Braille for adults. I'm
not sure it is, actually. Pre-Braille means different things to different people, so I'm not sure there's any straight answer to that. But it's actually getting your fingers not only used to Braille, but used to feeling. And it sounds really ridiculous to say it, but certainly even more so with adults, their fingers, they're not designed to feel. They really need to be able to learn to feel. And that is pre-Braille. It might be feeling objects in the classroom. It might not be feeling actual Braille. It might be feeling things around the house. It might be feeling the tablecloth that might have a nice little pattern on it. Just building up those actual abilities within the fingers to feel. It sounds kind of ridiculous when you explain it, but and then the pre-Braille skills, actually learning how to move your hands along a line rather than skew whiff and go off the line, and you know, so to be able to move in a straight line, to be able to get back to the beginning of a line again successfully. So all those sort of things for pre-Braille. What else can you tell me about pre-Braille, Matthew? And I'm aware that there is a question about the Braille display. We will get to that in a minute.
We'll come back to that. So I think everything's right, and you are right. Actually, fundamentally, pre-Braille isn't that different between children and adults. I think what I was meaning by pre-Braille being different is that you need to try and find activities that will promote pre-Braille, and those activities might be different. So for very small children, very simple things, right? Get yourself a roll of bubble wrap and just give the small child a roll of bubble wrap and let them pop the bubble wrap, because that will get them used to finding the individual, bubbles to bubble them, and that will get them used to telling the difference between one that's been popped and one that hasn't been popped, and it will get their fingers used to moving around, and it will actually increase their finger strength as well, not necessarily for Braille reading, because you don't need too much strength for reading, but strength for writing. It'll get them used to all of those sorts of things. If the child is a bit older, playing, Lego, Duplo, anything like that connects is quite good. Tying knots. I used to have great fun tying knots, and the precursor to that might be threading beads. If you've got beads, wooden beads or plastic beads, thread them onto string, and tie a knot. So make a necklace or something like that, or a bracelet out of beads. Anything creative like that you can engage someone in. Learn to play a musical instrument. Perhaps the guitar is not the best choice, although it's do what you need to do. But things like the piano or the recorder or things like that, where your fingers are moving a lot, just getting the fingers used to being nimble in whatever way really suits the child, but really, or the adult or the teenager or what have you, but really promoting those fine motor skills. And then, yes, transitioning them. So this brings us on quite nicely to how we would teach children to read Braille. And the very first thing that a child is likely to encounter in terms of actual something that's recognizably Braille is not likely to be anything like a word. It's likely to be a line of A's or a line of C's or a line of what we would call the 4 signs, so just all 6 dots, a line all the way across the page, to get them used to follow the line and is it going in a straight line? And then maybe a line of C's with a gap in the middle. So can you find where the gap is, and can you skip over the gap to get to the remainder of the line? Or a line of C's with an L in the middle. Can you identify the odd one out? And then as you start to learn letters, that carries on. Whereas at the early stage, a line of C's with an L, and you're just identifying that there's an odd one out, the next step on that line might be, okay, that line of C's with an L, what was that odd letter out? So you're identifying individual letters. And once you've got that down, that's when you start to sort of talk about, reading words. And words will start off being very easy words like, ball and tall and dad and mum, words like that, very simple words, particularly for children. I feel like Mel, you wanted to come in on something.
Or it also needs to be meaningful to the child. And if they want to learn how to read their name, then why not? Because they're still feeling it and they're still learning. So yes, it's good to stick to a stringent method to learn, and you learn certain letters in a certain order, and it's all very good. But if they want to feel their name, then great. Anything that's going to encourage them to learn is really, really important. That's all I was going to say.
And to respond to the question that just came in about how long would you expect pre-Braille to take, as long as it takes, I think probably 2 or 3 months is a bit short. This is the same local authority that now doesn't want to teach Braille at all, I think. So, there's quite a bit of cynicism going on here, as you can tell. I think probably 2 to 3 months is a bit short. It really does depend on the child, though. Some children will pick it up quicker than others. It's one of those things that if you do it well, you won't even realize that you're doing it. you know, a child will naturally start to fiddle with things. I mean, I'm sure every child has done it. When you're in a car seat, the first thing a child will want to do is to undo the seatbelt. If the child successfully manages to undo the seatbelt, that's I mean, it's really unsafe, and you probably want to discourage it. But at the same time, this is really good pre-Braille stuff, because clearly they've managed to use their fingers to do that, and they've explored and they've worked out where the catch is, and they've been able to do it. So really, you know, if they start off and they're allowed to explore, and they're occasionally allowed to do things that they shouldn't necessarily be allowed to do, provided it's relatively safe, actually the pre-Braille's already started, and you might find that there's less to do formally.
Right. To add to that as well, because my child very quickly, he can see normally. I'm the only one in my family that can't see. My child has normal vision, and his first big thing was to learn to open the stair gate, and it took me about a week to realise he could do it, because I used to walk upstairs and think, oh gosh, I forgot to close it, and then I'd close it, and oh, I must have forgotten to close it, and then of course about a week afterwards I thought to let him do it himself. And so yes, they you know, everyone builds up their tactile skills, but it's also worth mentioning that just like adults, not everyone can do it, children or adults, and there may be a problem with someone's fingers. They may just not have that sensitivity for whatever reason, especially a child who maybe has other needs and not just low vision. There may be a problem with the ends of their fingers. There may be I don't know, nerve ending problems or all sorts. So if a child was taking quite a long time to do what I would call pre-Braille skills, I would be asking questions, you know, is there someone who can assess this properly? Because, you know, there are people who just cannot do it. And if you really can't, then it can be very frustrating to keep trying and trying and trying and never getting there. So, you know, it's worth getting somebody to do that assessment that really knows about tactile skills and pre-Braille skills, just in case it's not possible for some reason.
Yeah. So we've talked about pre-Braille. We've talked about how...
Sorry,
oh, yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. Just had a question that related to pre-Braille, so I want to slip this in now. How long would you expect the pre-Braille stage to last for a young child? We're told initially a year by the LA, but stopped after 2 to 3 months.
Yeah, so I think
we saw that one.
I think I tried to answer that already.
Yeah.
If you need further clarification on that, then come back.
No, that's fine. You did answer it before. That's fine. Thank you.
Okay.
No problem, Rachel.
All right, sorry. So pre-Braille and learning letters, we've sort of talked about. I don't want to talk too much about the next stage on, because there are various different approaches. Would you believe there was a time when the education system was relatively stable? And it's definitely not where we're at now. You know, reading in schools was very well established that this is the way you teach reading. And there was a group from something called the Visual Impairment Education Workforce, the VIEW Curriculum Group, and RNIB devised 2 very well thought of, highly regarded reading schemes. The first one was called Braille for Infants. It's now called Hands On. And that taught grade 1 Braille, so the letters of the alphabet, and I think some very basic punctuation, and 1 or 2 of the grade 1 signs. Having completed Braille for Infants, or Hands On, the child would then progress to Take Off. And Take Off covered grade 2. And this was all really well designed and really well implemented in line with the curriculum framework of the day. The Take-Off books had a supporting set of books produced called the Abby books. You might have come across these. Abby, spelled A-B-I, the Abby books, Adventures of a Young Blind Girl. And the Abby books were designed to run in parallel with the Take-Off books. So, or Take-Off series 1 to 6 to be precise. Take-Off goes up to series 12, I think, or 10, and the Abby books go up to the first 6 series of Take-Off. So the idea was that you would learn Braille using Take-Off, and then you would take the Abby books home as the reading book. And this worked very well until the government came in, and I think not unreasonably, but it caused the Braille world a bit of a panic, came in and said, no, we're completely changing the way we teach reading. We're going to teach reading through phonics. This has been an ongoing problem for Braille ever since. and different local authorities are trying different ways to solve the problem. There is a movement towards trying to coordinate this nationally. The movement is there, it's gaining traction. We are starting to see, for example, Read Write Inc., which is a phonics scheme, very well regarded phonics scheme in print. We're starting to see some resources to support teaching Braille through the Read Write Inc. scheme, championed largely by somebody called Jean Weiss. I can't spell her name, it begins with a W, but she's marvellous and is doing a lot of work in this field. The government's, what they call it, letters and sounds, there's one local authority in particular who's doing a lot of work on this, trying to get a Braille reading scheme that is compatible with it. So I think in the next few years we might start to see some sort of centralised approach to it, a bit like hands-on and take-off. For now, we don't have a centralised approach, and we don't have anything approaching best practice. So local authorities are essentially doing what they feel is best, and actually what it involves quite often is quite a lot of tailored resources for individual children. And you might find that, okay, whereas 20 years ago it was absolutely the right thing to do to follow takeoff, you might find they're not following takeoff rigidly, but you might do a series of takeoff. You might have never heard of takeoff until series 7, and then they put them on series 7 to learn a couple of contractions that they're struggling to get into their heads. So I think as long as you can see that your child is making progress, I wouldn't come down too harshly on local authorities for the way that they're teaching Braille at the moment. They're doing the best they can in an environment which, it's fair to say, is really quite poorly resourced. And we know it's poorly resourced, and we're trying to do something about it, but there's only so many hours in the day. If the child is clearly not making progress, and I mean, you will know this as a parent, that there are reading tests. Incidentally, the reading tests have also not been maintained terribly well. In the, I think probably the 80s or the 90s, the standard reading test was the Neal Analysis of Reading Ability, or NARA. There was an institute based out of Birmingham University at that time called the RCEVH. It was the Research Centre for the Education of Visual and Hearing, I think, visual and hearing impairment. Anyway, RCEVH became VICTA, not Victor, but they became the Visual Impairment Centre for Teaching and Research, VICTAR. It was headed up by Professor Graham Douglas and Professor Mike Tobin and Dr. Steve McCall and various others, with influences from the likes of Rory Cobb at RNIB. I think practically all of those people have retired now. Professor Graham Douglas is still around and is valiantly flying the flag, but there's been a lot of staff turnaround in VICTA and it's not... projects like the Neal Analysis test have kind of got lost. So what they did was they standardized the Neal test. They said, what is the appropriate reading age for a print reader, and what does that reading age look like in terms of a Braille reader? That standardization has not taken place for a lot of years. I mean, 10 plus, possibly even 20 plus years, and a lot of schools are no longer using the Neal Analysis test. The replacement tests have not been officially transcribed, so they're quite often homegrown Braille versions. They may or may not be transcribed accurately. So if you're given a reading age of what your child's reading age is, it's probably not wholly inaccurate, but it would be worth taking it with a pinch of salt, and you might find that different local authorities would give your child a different reading age for the same test. Again, something that we know about, something we're doing something about, but slowly. So that's where we're at. However, if the child is with the same local authority from year 1 to year 6 and beyond, whether the test is a good test or not is sort of irrelevant, really. It is at least a consistent test, and you should see consistent improvement in that reading test. If you're not seeing reading test scores, ask for them. If you're not seeing improvement in the reading test, it might be a good idea to have a conversation with the school about how Braille is being taught. If you're going to have that conversation, it would be worth a pre-conversation with the previous people I've talked about, people like RNIB, the CYPF team at RNIB, just to make sure you're having a conversation along the right lines. But as a general rule, I mean, is there such a thing as a general rule nowadays? If they've got to the end of secondary school and they don't know grade 2, I would start to raise warning signs at that point. Ideally, it would be quite nice if they knew grade 2 before they got to the end of secondary school. Certainly, if primary school, sorry. If I start to think of myself, when I did my year 6 SATs, I did my year 6 SATs entirely in grade 2, and I knew all of my grade 2 by the age of about 8 or 9. Because of the way we're teaching reading and because of the way we're trying to implement phonics and Braille into phonics, it may be that they learn it slightly later. But if they're starting secondary school and they don't know grade 2, this would be a significant worry, in my opinion. And that's really all I want to say. I want to be honest, but I also want to be professional, and I also want to be fair to the industry.
But also,
so,
Matthew, with
yeah.
If a child is reading incredibly slowly and with great difficulty and moving their hands around and struggling, then as someone who's read Braille for a long time and taught Braille, I would be wondering, have those tactile skills been taught properly? Because they are the basic foundations of reading this pre-Braille, learning how to feel, all that stuff that we mentioned earlier on. If that is not taught correctly, that foundation, then as they get more and more signs, more and more letters, more and more grade 2 signs, things are going to start falling apart if those tactile skills aren't right. So, it's sort of things that you can look out for. I also want to address a quick question, because we had it quite a while ago, about, and it's quite easy to clarify, why do some courses do sorry, I'm distracted as well by the chat. If some courses teach Braille alphabet in alphabetical order, and why do some courses teach Braille A and then L and then D and then T, so in a strange order? When we teach Braille to sighted people, we teach it in a very different way to the way we teach Braille to someone who can't see. And so if someone is learning Braille with their fingers, so learning Braille in a tactile way, we don't tend to teach Braille, whether it's children or adults, we don't tend to teach it in the alphabetical order. We teach the Braille letters. For the first one, the easiest one to feel, and then the next letter, still quite easy to feel, but a great difference between the first one. So when the Braille is taught in a different order, it's generally so that when the tactile skills are still being learned, they're not learning really complex letters to begin with. So it's actually the tactile side of it is the reasoning behind. And also, if you teach Braille from A, B, C, D, we all know our alphabet. Even quite young children. So if they were reading moving their fingers across the Braille, A, B, C, D, well, we know the alphabet, they might not be really feeling it. Whereas if you do Braille in a different order, then they actually have to know what letter they're putting their finger across. Whereas with a sighted learner, that doesn't tend to happen in the same way. So that's hopefully clarified that one. I think there was another question as well came in too.
There was, and I'll address that because it's from the same person. I would also add to that, depending on how old your son is, it would be worth having a chat with some of your son's school friends, because what might be happening is that the school may not be teaching the alphabet in alphabetical order. There are some letters that occur more than others, and so they might opt not to teach that letter until I know certainly when I was at school, irrespective of how Braille was taught, even the sighted people around me were not taught the alphabet in, strictly speaking, the right order, because they needed to be able to make make words out of letters, and to understand, nowadays we call them split digraphs, the magic E and things like that. So you'd have a whole lesson learning about letter E, but you'd need to have enough letters before you've learnt the letter E to make the letter E make sense. So that's just a thought there. To address the slightly more thorny question, so how should we expect Braille reading progress to be monitored, termly or annually, by our child's QTVI? When we ask our QTVI to set Braille learning targets, they seem reluctant to do so, or they don't want to commit to anything concrete. So there's a few reasons for it. It might be because the QTVI actually is not terribly confident in teaching Braille themselves. I've seen that a few times where a QTVI's done the Braille course, but then hasn't had to teach Braille for 5 or 6 years, and so they are frantically trying to keep up as best they can. And I mean, that's unfortunate for the child and definitely something to take up, but also a very, very difficult position for the QTVI to be put in. It's an unfair position for them, really. I would say that most local authorities should have a system in place for target setting. I'm going to give a politician's answer. Certainly when I've spoken to QTVIs in the past, they've had charts and they've said, these are the various stages that we work towards, and by this stage they should have learned this letter and these sets of contractions, and by this stage they should have learned this. I haven't seen many authorities that don't have that. They would either follow the takeoff scheme and they would say, right, by this point they're going to be at takeoff series 2, and by this stage they're going to be at the end of takeoff series 3, or they would make their own based on whatever phonics thing they've got. And if they're not doing that, again, it might be worth escalating that to ask how the local authority monitors progress. I used to get reading test results. I think any sighted child would get reading test results, surely. Do they get reading test results termly or annually? I'm not actually sure how that works anymore. I think I used to get them annually. I used to be pulled aside once a year and they'd do a reading test and they'd work out what my reading age was. So I would check, actually, in the first instance with the other parents at the school. Is the school doing reading tests for sighted children? How often do those reading test results come out? And if the sighted children are getting termly reading test results, I think it would be reasonable to expect the blind child to also get termly reading test results. If they're only getting annual ones, it would be reasonable for the child to get annual ones. But if they're not getting anything at all, I don't really know is the honest answer. Another question for RNIB, but there will be an answer to it, and hopefully that's probably not a concrete answer, but hopefully it's given you some avenues to explore.
Right. Yes,
You might
hopefully
as well.
that's helped, Sam, because there's been a couple of questions. I probably have missed some, so apologies. I'm using a screen reader to listen to the chat, and so of course now and again I'm not listening properly and I miss it. But there was a question. We go back a bit. Really on the lines of who should learn.
From
Braille
Hannah,
still.
I think.
Yeah, that's right.
Would you recommend teaching Braille to all VI children who don't know what the progression of their condition would be? My daughter actually asked to learn it at age 13 as she realised vision was getting harder, but now it feels she may. Sorry, I'm reading from Braille.
Yeah, that's right. I've got
it may
now.
have been better to start learning earlier. Okay, so I get the gist of that. I'll let you answer it, Mel. I'll just carry on.
Well, I think
it's
a slightly personal one, because I think everyone feels a little bit differently. I don't think there's a right and wrong in it. It really depends on how a child feels about learning Braille and how they feel about their vision, because some are reticent to learn, and if it's like any form of learning, if you don't want to do it, then you're not going to be as motivated. But if you do want to do it, I personally feel that if someone has a visual impairment and they want to learn Braille, I think they should. And I think they should be encouraged to. Unfortunately, that's not how the system works, but I still think it's important, because we never know with a visual impairment how that vision is going to hold up. And we're kind of going back to what we said at the beginning a little bit, but it's another tool in your toolbox for when your eyes are tired, when you're having a bad day. So yes, I know the opportunity isn't always there. Having said that, it doesn't mean that if someone's in their 20s, 30s or 80s that they can't learn Braille, because it's never too late to learn. But yes, if the interest is there and the keenness is there, then I'd be doing all the encouraging I could, I think.
Yeah, and don't do it, from a guilty position either. I just caught the end of that question, and you're sort of feeling that actually, as parents, you don't know what's best. And that is
That's right.
that is absolutely true. You know, if you're new to visual impairment, you're not going to know best. You've just got to make a decision that you think is the best decision at the time. And you've got to hope that the industry's on your side, and sometimes it isn't. So I wouldn't dwell too much on the fact that she hasn't learnt it earlier. If she
No,
wants
not
to
at
learn
all.
it now, then let's get her started learning it now. The slight inconvenience of learning it now is, of course, it's harder to fit it in around studies. You know, because studies are getting harder and harder and harder, which in fact may be why she wants to learn it, because actually, you know, she needs to be able to read textbooks. If she's learning it at 13, she might not be ready to do her GCSEs in Braille by the time she's 16. She might be, or she might not. And wanting to do it is, I think, particularly important, because if she wants to do it, she might be more willing to commit to maybe having a lesson after school, or having a lesson in break time or something, or a free period. So that there might be a bit of that, just to make sure that it doesn't impact on the timetable. But yeah, absolutely. She should definitely learn it if she's keen to learn it.
Yeah, keenness is the key there to me, because, you know, I've seen so many people, when they are motivated, they can learn, and they can actually learn quite quickly as well, if they've got a reason to learn. We all need a reason to learn something, a goal, a motivation, and if that's there, then yeah, it's a brilliant way. So
there we go. There's just a couple more things on the list, and we're approaching 9 o'clock, so we ought
yeah,
to just.
I know time is not on
Yeah,
our side,
I mean
but
it's fine.
we've covered most of what we wanted to cover, I think. So,
But we ought to just rattle through a couple of things very quickly. We were going to talk about how parents could learn Braille or support their children learning Braille. A lot of this actually has already come up already. We talked about the Clear Vision project, which is, I mean, Clear Vision is great because you've got the print and the Braille interleaved, so you know you can read the print and your child can read the Braille, and that all works very well. For parents learning Braille, I mentioned earlier on uebonline.org. There's another history lesson in terms of why it's called UEB. It had to do with the fact that the American Braille code and the English Braille code had some minor differences between them, and so a few years ago, those differences were resolved into a new code called the Unified English Braille Code, because it unified the British and the American system. There's a more complex history lesson, which I won't go into now, but that is where UEB comes from. UEB is Unified English Braille, and uebonline.org is an interactive online tutorial to teach predominantly sighted people to teach them Braille. It would be well worth looking at. I know a lot of people have had a lot of success with it. There is a competitive website, I believe, that's been launched fairly recently called Braille Brain from the American Printing House for the Blind. I don't have anything good to say about it, but I don't have anything bad to say about it either. I haven't looked at it yet. I haven't managed to evaluate it. APH generally do fairly high quality stuff. So if UEB Online isn't your bag, you might want to have a look at Braille Brain and see if that's any better. And of course, there are books available from RNIB, the Braille Primer being the obvious starting point for sighted people. And in fact, even if you're doing something like UEB Online, the Braille Primer may not be a bad book for you to buy, because it's just a nice little, it's got some practice exercises in it, and it's got references of what all the signs mean and things. So that'd be a good place to start. And the other thing that we were going to talk about is Braille technology, and I think that probably is a session in and of itself, but it harkens back to that question, Mel, that came in a while ago. What was the Braille display that you held up? I guess it was either a Focus or a Brilliant or
yeah,
something.
you don't know the answer to that one,
No,
do
I
you?
don't.
Well, I'll put you out of your misery, Matthew. It was actually a Brilliant, but that doesn't mean that the Brilliant is the best. It just happened to be the one I had nearest to me to lift up and make my point at that time. It was an actual 20-cell Braille display. Of course, you can have 20, 40, 80, you know, and anything in between. Well, not anything in between, but they go up generally to 80 cells. So I think Braille displays are, as Matthew says, a session in themselves. But just to briefly say that, you know, technology, it is there. I think I have several books on this Braille display, so it saves carrying lots and lots of Braille around with me. It's all nice and small in a little box. I can have lots of stuff on there. I can also connect it to my iPhone or iPad, and I can send email messages, whatever else, typing them in Braille, and they're coming up, being translated, coming up in print on the screen. So the Braille display idea is so useful, endless in its usefulness. But Matthew's the technical guy, so that's all I'm going to say about technology.
Well, I am, but I'm not really going to add anything else onto that because it was a very good overview.
Thank you.
However,
Sarah.
if the thing about Braille displays is they're quite expensive. I wouldn't let that put you off. There's this charity that I don't know if you've heard of. They're called VICTA, and they have a grants program. So I would talk to VICTA. They might be able to support you in acquiring a Braille display for home use, not for educational use, because that's the responsibility of the local authority, but a Braille display for home use. And they can be used either standalone, or this is the really important thing, they can be used in combination with mainstream technology. So you could use a Braille display connected to your computer, which is how I'm reading all the chat messages, or you could use it in combination with a smartphone, an iPhone or an iPad or an Android device. And if you can't afford a Braille display, there are other options available, including this wonderful thing called Braille screen input. And I won't dwell on it now, but this could be a huge motivator. It certainly was a motivator for me to sort of get back into Braille. I went through a period of not doing an awful lot of Braille. And then I got a girlfriend, and she expected me to text her. And oh dear, did I hate texting my girlfriend? It was terrible. Because I either had to persevere with this horrendous, QWERTY keyboard on the bottom of a touchscreen, which was just a horrible thing, or I had to dictate my messages. Well, I didn't really want to be dictating my messages to my girlfriend because, if I'm on a bus, sometimes the bus doesn't want to hear those messages. So that's fine. I could have a Bluetooth keyboard, okay, but that's an extra thing that I've got to carry and I've got to get it out, and it's just a mess. Or I could Braille the message directly onto the touch screen of the iPhone.
I'm actually showing a screen, Matthew, the iPhone screen facing the camera with Braille screen input, and there are 6 dots labelled on the screen, and the idea is you put your fingers over the dots and you can tap away and actually produce Braille in that way on a Braille screen. Sorry to interrupt you, but I just wanted to say what I was doing.
No, that's good. And the speed with which you can do Braille screen input is probably, especially if you know grade 2 Braille, I would say is the equivalent of the speed at which a sighted person can type on the touchscreen of the iPhone.
Absolutely, I'd agree with that.
And the Braille code is so diverse now, it's very comprehensive that if you know what you're doing, there might be a bit of setup in order to get it to work exactly the way you want it to work. But even things like emoji characters, there will be a way of using Braille screen input in order to input those. So, if as my girlfriend did, she expected smiley faces and sad faces and things like this that I just didn't have time for. But I'm not showing her in a good light, really, am I?
You're not.
Any wonder she broke up with me, really. But anyway, look, I was able to get Braille screen input to do all of that. I could get my smiley faces, I could get my sad faces, all of those. Just by using 6-key entry directly on the touchscreen, and this was an absolute game changer for me. So, you might not learn Braille and use it to read books. I mean, good grief, they take up a shelf and it's slow and everything else. You might do, you might not. But even if you learn Braille, and even if all you use it for is for taking notes and for using Braille screen input, I mean, this is just a huge game changer and a huge leveler.
We should say as well, it's built into the phone. It's not a separate app. The one we're showing, the Apple one, is built into the operating system itself. So I use VoiceOver, which is the screen reader. So that's the speech for the iPhone, and Braille screen input is built in like that. So you can turn it on and off when you're in a keyboard. Where you're about to type something, you can just have it set so that you can flick around to open it, use it, and then close it again if you wish to. So it's built in, the answer to that question.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got time for a few more questions. I see they're starting to come in. One of which was the question that I was hoping wouldn't come up, but it's a fair question. The cost of Braille displays, which is, yes, I mean, definitely in four figures. I would definitely consider approaching VICTA about grants for things like this. There are cheaper displays available. The most common one is called the Orbit Reader, the Orbit Reader 20 or the Orbit Reader 40. These are good displays. I don't really have much bad to say about the Orbit Reader. They're cheap. The Braille quality is good. The battery life is fantastic.
They're not huge. That's an Orbit
No,
Reader. They're not a huge machine.
they're a nice display. There will come a time, I think, when you'll outgrow an Orbit Reader, insofar as because it's cheap. You imagine you've got a row of 20 Braille cells. Each Braille cell has got 6 pins. We won't talk about pins 7 and 8 for the cursor, but even if each cell had 6 pins, that's 120 pins that every time you move on to the next line have got to pop up and down. So on the more expensive displays, that happens near enough silently. You wouldn't hear it unless you were really up close or you had a really sensitive microphone. On the Orbit Reader, because it's a cheaper display, that is a louder and slightly slower, but louder is the important thing, speed of refresh. So you'll find, people use Braille for all sorts of things, including reading aloud in a context of a child, for example, reading aloud at school assemblies, or they might decide that they are really into spoken word. They might want to do some comedy, or they might want to do some poetry. They might want to enter a talent competition and read aloud a short story that they've written or something like that. If they're reading it from an Orbit Reader, the sound of the Orbit Reader will be picked up over the microphone, whereas the sound of a Brailliant, for example, might not be. And there are features which I don't want to talk about too much because they're disappointingly not available yet in the UK. But for example, on the Brailliant Braille displays, they are promising us that they will be able to directly integrate with RNIB Bookshare and RNIB reading services. So if you've got a book on Bookshare that you want, you'll be able to go into the menus on the Brailliant, go into the Bookshare menu and download the book. It's got Wi-Fi built in, and download the book directly from Bookshare. And you could open it in Word or in PDF or EPUB or whatever file format you want, and it would read it. The Orbit Reader, being a cheaper display, doesn't have that sort of functionality. So choose carefully.
I was going to just mention one more advantage of the Braille display before we leave it, and we will, because we're run out of time actually. If anyone has difficulty with tactile skills, so if a page of Braille is just too much for someone's fingers and they can't get the tracking right, so they're not staying on the line properly, not finding the next line properly, having a Braille display is really good for that, because you only have one line of Braille to read across, and then you press a button to get to the next line. So for people with tactile skills difficulties, they are really, really useful, because they enable that person quite often to read Braille.
Yeah. I think we've got a bit longer. I think we've got to 9:30. So I will just...
Is it 9 or 9:30? I wasn't sure.
We've got until 9:30, so you've got...
Oh, okay, sorry.
we've got a bit of time
to wrap up, guys.
Yeah, I'll keep going. This is a really interesting question from Sam. If I do a Braille course to teach myself Braille, etc., would like it to be accredited. Sorry, I've got a horrible underline underneath. Oh, there we go. I've fixed it now. But yes, which courses are accredited, essentially? This is an interesting question. The answer is none of them. That is not to say that there is an accredited course. Accreditation in this country is very poor. In fact, even the Birmingham course is not terribly well accredited, if I'm being completely honest. If you really wanted to work in the field, what they would probably look for is experience of some sort. And if they can't find experience, they would probably look for you to do some form of internal assessment. I know, for example, if you apply to be a Braille transcriber at RNIB, part of the application process would involve transcribing a document, and they would assess it that way rather than trying to assess it based on qualification. The UEB online course has been around for a long time. at least 2016 or so, and it's probably the closest that we've got now to an accredited online course. So certainly there would be no harm in doing the UEB online course and buying the certificate. And if you're applying for a job in the industry and you have the UEB online certificates and the other applicants don't, it will probably push you ahead of the other applicants. But in and of itself, it's not an accreditation to work in the industry and to work in Braille, and there isn't actually such a thing. RNIB do a Braille certificate, I think. They certainly used to, and even the RNIB Braille certificate wouldn't actually qualify as accreditation as such. So I think I'm saying UEB Online is the answer to your question, really, but that's the slightly longer answer.
There are, I think the RNIB still do the certificate, and I certainly had to get that to have a proper salary for teaching Braille. That was from the Adult Education Service, that was through the council. They wanted a qualification. So, but the question about this Braille displays, we didn't really say too much about any individual Braille display because there are so many. But yes, we did mention the Brailliant and I think the Focus as well. And it's really, you know, different ones suit different people. Something I would say though about Braille displays is it's quite important to have training, because if you're paying all that money for something, it's really good to be able to get the very most and very best from it. So training, I think, is a must. It's the sort of thing that, you know, you really want to get your money's worth, don't you? So sorry to go back onto that again,
No,
Matthew.
that's fine. And on the subject
just...
of training, again, I'm going to put my foot in it here. Charlotte's never going to invite me back, but please talk to VICTA about this sort of thing. I know that VICTA have family weekends. If you know, a session at a family weekend where we bring some Braille displays down and let you have a play with them and maybe do like an introductory workshop and some basic training, you know, if that's something that would be useful as a family weekend, let VICTA know. We'd be more than happy to do it, but you know, we need to know that it's something that's demanded. So, you know, please
we're always
keep the
open to
conversation
suggestions. Yeah, I will pass them on to the activities team. So we had a lot of people who were interested in finding out a bit more.
Yeah. There was something else I was going to say, and it's gone clean out. Oh, yes. Watch this space. There's a very knowledgeable person called Jackie Brown. Jackie Brown is she lives out in Northern Ireland and works for the RNIB Technology for Life team. Several years ago, she wrote a book called Braille on Display, which was a rundown of all of the Braille displays that were on the market at the time. And I think the book is still available, but is somewhat out of date now. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to tell you, but I'm going to tell you anyway. I don't think it's especially confidential. Jackie is working on an update to that book. It will be published by RNIB, and I think they're hoping to publish it this year. So if you hear news in the future about a book called Braille on Display, it would be worth getting a copy of that book. And I think RNIB are hoping to sell it at no cost or distribute it at no cost. So if the question comes up about which Braille display is best, aside from, you know, things that the Braillists have done, which are very good in and of themselves, but Jackie's book, when RNIB publishes it, will be the definitive resource and will be the go-to thing for that sort of question.
She's excellent. She's very knowledgeable on her subject. So yes, she and impartial too, I would say, just, you know, as much as she can be.
Okay, brilliant. Have we come to the end of the presentation? Have you got any more bits you wanted to cover, or are you just going to leave like the last 15 minutes for some further Q&A?
I'm just happy to let the conversation flow at this point. I think it's been really valuable. You know, we didn't really know what to expect when we came in, so we had a presentation ready just in case. But I'm really pleased that it's gone this way. It's been wonderfully interactive.
It is, and it's better to address the questions as much as we can when they come through. I suppose one thing I don't think I've mentioned, we haven't said too much about our Brailleist Foundation Braille for Beginners course.
Yes.
And probably one of the reasons for that, as far as I'm concerned, it is based for tactile learners, and so most parents of visually impaired children would have sight, I would think, and so that's why I haven't really pushed it too hard, because it's really for people learning in a tactile way. So that's, you know, that's why we've said more about UEB online, and even the Braille Primer, which is another way that sighted people learn Braille. So it's not that we don't promote our own course, it's just that, you know, it is really for tactile learners. So I just wanted to clarify that, really.
That's right. What I would say about the Braillists, though, is some of the things that we do beyond Braille for Beginners might be of interest. The audience for the Braillists really it is blind people, and that is more by the people. We were able to reach blind people very easily. It's not that we don't want sighted people to be in the audience. Quite the contrary. We would actually love to reach more sighted people. It's just we don't know how to do it. So we've ended up with this audience of blind people, and so a lot of what's on the website is very boring. Audio and text. There's no videos, there's no graphics. If you enjoy listening to podcasts, you are absolutely golden. The Braillecast podcast is where I would send you. It's all one word, BRAILLECAST. And I'm sure we can get that put in the chat. Braillecast.com. But if you have iTunes or Spotify or Amazon Music or any of them really, Stitcher, any of those podcast programs, stick Braillecast in. The episodes are quite long and quite detailed. It's the sort of thing you probably either want to listen to at double speed or you want to listen to it if you've got a long commute into work. But I mean, really valuable content, and I don't just say that because I created some of it. We really go into quite a lot of detail about a particular topic, and that could be anything from how to teach Braille right the way through to how to choose your Braille display, Braille embossers, which is something we haven't talked about, but we do talk about that on the podcast. Right the way through, improving reading speed. We've done a couple of sessions on that. Things like the Braille music code. We're looking at doing some work on the Braille maths code. We've done some sessions on computer notation in Braille, shorthand notation, getting the most out of Braille technology, using Braille with an iPhone, using Braille with a computer. So there's this huge, vast array of things. And then interviews with product manufacturers. So we've had Humanware on, for example, talking about the Brailliant displays. And we've had Computer Room Services come on talking about their Braille displays, and Freedom Scientific talking about their Braille displays. And we'll soon have Orbit Research on. So, a wealth of resources there if you're interested in listening to podcasts. And hopefully you'll gain something valuable from that.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I did put that into the chat. We've had a parent say they'd like to learn Braille in the tactile way to understand her daughter's experience. That's come from Rachel. What are your thoughts?
I saw that just now. And I think we've had another parent, haven't we, Matthew, on our Braille for Beginners, learning the tactile way for that very same reason. I'm not sure there's any reason why they can't do that.
No, I mean, by all means, sign up. We have very generous amounts of funding, actually, for Braille for Beginners. So, I mean, don't ever worry about taking away resources from somebody else who might need them more than you do or anything fancy like that. Actually, the more resources we shift, the more of a case we've got for applying for more funding in the future. So, sign up and register and get a copy of the resources and feel free to follow them. It'd be wonderful to have you. Just be aware that the pace might be quite slow and it might not be the optimum way to learn. But if it's a way that you want to learn, we certainly wouldn't discourage that at all.
Well, no, it's a way that that you can gain understanding of the child's learning. I think that's I understood the question correctly.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yes, it's a good way of understanding pre-Braille skills. There is also on the Braille for Beginners, we have a monthly, I think we call it sort of office hours, but it's a Zoom session that runs once a month. And once you're registered for Braille for Beginners, you're able to join that Zoom session. And we do find that our other Braille for Beginners participants, they help one another. We all have a discussion, I think first Tuesday of the month normally, this kind of time of the evening, 7:30ish, and it's really, really useful. So yes, it has benefited parents.
Yeah. Interesting question from Sam. how can I create and print out simple learning resources in Braille format at home using a normal Mac computer and printer? I don't know whether you want to come in and talk more about that. The real problem with this, I mean, the simple answer is if you want it to be in tactile Braille, you can't, or at least not without a lot of effort. The reason for that is that the way that the Braille printing process works is literally you have to punch dots into paper. So there is one or more pins, if you like. They're not quite pins, they're a bit fatter than pins, but they are literally punching dots into paper. So a printer actually doesn't have the mechanical mechanism to produce Braille in a tactile form. There are Braille printers, they call them Braille embossers, that can do it. And actually Braille embossers, there's a company called Index Braille. They're sold in the UK by Humanware. Index embossers will connect up to a Mac computer, and that would be a way of doing it. If you wanted to just produce the black dots, it's probably a little bit too detailed to get into in this call, but there are Braille fonts that you can download. So you could download a Braille font, install it, apply that font to the text and blow it up to about size 24 and print it out. And you would get the black dots, but they wouldn't be tactile, so they'd be okay for you as a sighted person to read, and they might be okay for illustrating Braille concepts, but yeah, not for the Braille reader. You could use a I think they call them Zychem machines now, the Zyfuse heater, possibly a PF machine. You could print onto swell paper and you could raise the dots up that way, and that would make them tactile. It's not a very optimum experience. Doing it with an embosser is better. But I hope that's given you some thoughts there.
Is there not Duxbury available on the Mac? And
there is. Yeah.
I'm not thinking of the actual Duxbury program, but there's a freeware piece called Perky Duck, isn't there? And you could use that to produce the Braille as well if you had a little bit of knowledge, or if you were learning Braille, and that would produce the ink dots version using the keyboard. So that's another option as well. There are a couple of ways, isn't there, of doing the actual ink print versions.
Thank you. I'm Sam. Sorry. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. It was I was really looking for a tactile print version. So it sounds like really only a Braille embosser would do that, and they, I believe, are really expensive.
Yeah,
They
I mean,
can be.
you can. I mean, the other option I think would be sort of 3D printing, but I mean that's equally as expensive and not really tried and tested. But I think the expense is only one part of the puzzle, and what I would say is that if you've got a blind child, you're in a really good place where the expense is concerned. It gets harder and harder to find funding as you get older, but there might be funding, as I say, through VICTA. There might be funding through the school. As the child gets older, there might be funding through, for example, disabled students allowance, when we get to university age. So, if an embosser is what's needed, in spite of the expense, don't be afraid to ask for it. And the other thing to comment, particularly about embossers, not so much about Braille displays, but embossers, the real problem with an embosser is that it's an upfront investment. I mean, they're $2,500 or something. They don't take ink, and they last for years. I mean, if you've got an embosser and it doesn't last you 10 years, I'd be complaining. An embosser should last you sort of between 10 and 20 years. And if you think about the amount of ink that you would put in a printer over that 10 or 20 year period, it doesn't take away the fact that it's an initial expense, but in the long run, it does start to even itself out.
Thank you.
Sorry, I was very quickly looking for a slate and stylus to do a.
Yeah, you do with a slate and I was just reading that too. With a slate and stylus, you do need to have some knowledge of Braille. So a Perkins is another option, Perkins Brailler, but that is not going to connect to a computer. So if it's just actually creating small amounts of Braille, then yes, the slate and stylus, if you have some Braille knowledge, they are much cheaper. And then you've got the Perkins Brailler, which is an actual Braille machine that you can, you know, roll paper into it and press keys and produce Braille. So that there are other options, but they're not actual Braille printers as such, so they wouldn't connect to a computer. But I use a slate and stylus almost every day, so they are amazing, you know, for producing quick bits of Braille.
Brilliant, thank you, Mel. Yeah, so just a comment about Perkins. Yeah, so just, I know Matthew has mentioned VICTA's funding. We're not funding Braille machines at the moment. We've actually pulled back on our grant system. What we have been doing though is helping the RNIB to distribute their Orbit reader. I just had a quick look. We haven't got any of them at the moment, so we kind of just wait for the RNIB to push them through. But there has been another organisation that I know people have been using recently. I'll just type it into the chat box. The Vinchell, can I spell it right? Vinchell Foundation, and they have been doing grants for people who are looking for that kind of equipment. And just let me do a quick one for you. I will go away and do some research on this for you for the follow-up email. It's on turn to us. I know guide dogs do grants, but people change what they give grants for and what tech and stuff. It changes so rapidly sometimes. I've got a list in the chat box, which is all the grants and latest news for people with a vision impairment, and there's a list on there, and that should detail the most up-to-date information about what's available out there. So yeah, good luck. Oh, sorry, we recently got a CCTV. Oh yeah, the Powell family as well. Oh, that's brilliant. Yeah, thank you for that, Rachel. That was the one that I was trying to remember actually. So thank you for that.
No problem.
We're getting towards the end now, and I really need to slip my poll in. So are we done with any questions? And I could just share my poll before we finish for the evening, and then we can say our good evenings. We've got 5 minutes left. Is that okay? Okay, thank you. Oh, where's it gone now? Polls, there we go. So it's the end poll. Sorry, I'm new. We're new. This is a new thing that we're doing. So just forgive my rummaging around trying to find the buttons. So this is the post-workshop questions. It's the same ones as what we started in. If you guys could give us some feedback. It's all anonymous as well, by the way, so don't worry, we're not going to be knowing who you are and what you thought.
You don't have to pass a test then at the end.
No. it's very useful for VICTA, and it's you know, and we had a chat about this before, and Matthew and Mel are quite keen to find out about what people thought about the presentation and the information they've given us tonight.
Could I ask one last question?
Oh, sorry, Sam. I didn't. Sorry, I have just spotted your hand up. Yeah, go for it.
Thank you. It was just all this talk about sort of different bits of text, slate and stylus, Perkins Braille. My son is only 6, year 1, so he's right at the beginning of his sort of Braille journey. He's just started learning last term. But I've just and they've just brought in a Perkins Braille for the first time to show him and let him sort of play around with. Just for us to support him at home, what's the one piece of tech that you would recommend getting at home to support him with his Braille journey? Because I'm sort of learning about Braille displays and Perkins Braille and all these things, and I'm sort of wondering, how do I introduce and create Braille within the home? If you've got to apply for grants, it's what do you go for? What would be the most useful of tools to start with at home for a sort of primary age child?
Right. Well, producing Braille is one thing. I suppose just if I had to think of a piece of tech to introduce Braille, that'd be something like an iPad or something, a tablet that had this Braille screen input, because at least you'd be able to have some fun writing some letters using the Braille screen input. I know that wouldn't actually produce Braille, so that's something different, but that would be the technology side. Certainly Perkins Braillers are not technology in my view. It's a very old-fashioned, a very useful machine, and I have one next to me all the time, but they're not for everyone, and they do come across, I think, as quite old-fashioned pieces of equipment, but they are again a very quick and easy way to produce Braille, but they also are quite expensive. If it was just that you wanted to make a few little labels for him for around the house, just so that he could feel a little bit of Braille, then it'd be something as simple as that Braille labeler, where you could just produce little bits of Dymo and stick them around the house, and just introduce him to little bits of Braille. I don't know what Matthew thinks, but that would be my thoughts.
My head actually is just going towards the Perkins, honestly. I mean, actually, my initial thought when you started talking, Sam, was that if he's only being introduced to Perkins at age 6, that's incredibly late.
Yeah, I thought that
I
too.
would have expected him to have been introduced to the Perkins at sort of 3 or something,
Well, that's really, I've had to fight for Braille, to be honest. It's been about 2 years of asking. So
I mean, it kind of depends on the child, but I think the Perkins is great because you can bang on it. You can make music on it. You can, funnily enough, you can make Braille on it as well. But I mean, I just used to have great fun actually just putting a piece of paper in a Brailler and just making wavy lines, or like, using it as a drum kit, or, just whatever. And the thing is, they're so hardy. I mean, look, you probably don't want to like spill a fizzy drink in it, right? That's probably going to do some damage. But I mean, if you're just sat there, banging about on a Perkins, it's going to annoy the neighbors, but it's not actually going to destroy the machine. They're hardy machines, and you can get them on eBay for a song. They might need, they don't break. You get one on eBay and somebody says Perkins Brailler not working, sell it for 40 quid or something. You'd be very unlucky if you bought that machine and it wasn't restorable, and restorable for a relatively good price. I would expect that someone like Alan Thorpe up in Sheffield could probably get that going for about 100, 150, something like that. So, you don't even necessarily need to buy a new Perkins Brailler to get the benefit from it. And for me, especially if the child is, if he's interested in sound and just playing with things.
If he's being put off at school, though, this is going to be the issue, because if he's not keen after seeing one at school, then it's making it fun. It's making it good.
I didn't register that he wasn't. I mean, what was his reaction to it when he saw it at school?
I think he's quite enjoyed bashing it. He likes making noises.
Oh, that's all right then.
Yeah, but then that's something
they've been very reluctant. They've told us, they've told school not to lend anything to us or bring anything home, and they want it to be. They're not very collaborative or sharing. So, but I think they're worried that he might tire. His interest might wane if it comes home.
Well, they might be worried about
effect,
that.
I would think.
Well, they might also be worried about their insurance premiums. That, in fact, what happens is even people in schools don't know how this stuff works, right? So they might be worried that the Perkins comes home, he uses it unsupervised, breaks it as far as they're concerned, which is impossible to do, really. And then they've got to get it serviced, and they don't have anyone in the authority who can service it, so then it has to be posted back. That'll be the sort of thing they're worried about. And it's getting increasingly common for authorities to worry about that sort of thing. But they're hardy machines. Get yourself one on eBay. And
as an idea, I've had my Perkins since I was 6, and it's still the same Perkins. And I used, and I sound 62, and I used to wander around my school with it as a 6-year-old. I could hardly lift it and carry it. This was before the days of support workers. We all had to carry our own equipment around with us in the 60s, and it's still going. So it had a few bashes, crashing it into walls and things when I couldn't see going around school, and all the rest of it, and it's still going. I think it's had one proper service in its lifetime, so they are quite robust.
That's brilliant, thank you.
Okay.
had lots of thanks in the chat comment. and
Yes, that's lovely. Thank you.
It's a huge thank you. I must admit, this has got to be one of the most interactive parents workshops we've ever ran before, but it just kind of lends to the fact that parents are really interested and probably feel a little like they're banging their head against the wall with local authorities, and it's so nice to see so many parents keen on finding how they can best support their child with it at home. So thank you very much to our two wonderful presenters for giving up your time this evening to join us. And thank you very much for the parents who've come in and asked lots of questions. And yes, it's been a really informative evening. So as I say, I'll be sending out a follow-up email tomorrow morning, including the recording of everything. And all the little bits that we've chatted about tonight and the links that I've put in the chat, and just some more information about, if you do want to chat to the Brailleist Foundation directly, the right contact details to be able to do that. So yeah, thank you very much, and I'm going to end the recording now and bid you all good night. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks for having us. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you.